The harsh winds of winter swept across the Apache plains as Thunderhawk stood at the edge of his property. 10 years he had waited, building this ranch for a bride who never returned. His weathered hands gripped the fence post, eyes fixed on the horizon where she had disappeared. The locals called him crazy for his unwavering loyalty to a ghost, but loyalty was all he had left. Until tonight. Through the driving rain came a figure, a woman, collapsed at his gate. Not his bride, but a runaway slave with desperate eyes and a bundle clutched to her chest. What secret could this stranger possibly hold that would connect her to the woman he'd waited a lifetime to see again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weathered cedar fence post creaked under Thunderhawk's grip. Dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and gold as his calloused fingers traced the notches carved into the wood, each line representing another month of waiting. 10 years of sunrises spent at this exact spot, watching, hoping. Behind him stood the ranch he'd built with his bare hands, a modest home with sturdy walls, a barn housing 3 horses and a milk cow, and fields that yielded enough to sustain a family. A family that never came. Thunderhawk carried the unconscious woman through his front door, her rain-soaked body surprisingly light in his arms. He laid her gently on the bearskin rug before his hearth, the firelight revealing her features more clearly. Deep brown skin, high cheekbones, and hands calloused from hard labor. Not his bright star, but a woman who had endured much, the small leather medicine pouch hanging from his neck, his most treasured possession, swung forward as he bent to examine her wounds. Inside was a lock of Bright Star's midnight hair, braided with strands of his own, bound with sinew on the night of their promise. He hadn't opened it in years, no need. The weight against his chest was reminder enough. "Who sent you here?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't answer. Thunderhawk moved with practiced efficiency, gathering clean cloths and a basin of warm water. As he tended her wounds, memories surfaced of how the young warrior he once was had fallen for a woman from a neighboring tribe, how their love had bloomed despite the tensions between their peoples, how war had torn them apart in his youth. They called him Strikes Without Sound for his ability to move undetected through enemy camps. Now the settlers who occasionally traded with him simply called him the Indian who waits, some with pity, others with mockery. "She ain't coming back, Chief," Mason Porter had told him just last week, leaning against his wagon. "War's been over near a decade now. Either she's dead or she found herself another man." Thunderhawk had simply nodded, returning to his work. Porter and his wife were the only settlers who bothered with him anymore, bringing supplies from town every few months in exchange for the fine horses he bred. The woman on his floor stirred, her breathing changing rhythm. Thunderhawk reached for his rifle, caution born of years living alone in contested territory, and stepped back, giving her space. Her eyes flew open, wide with fear as she scrambled backward until she hit the wall. Her gaze darted around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the hanging herbs, the Apache artifacts mixed with practical settler tools. "Water," Thunderhawk said softly, offering a cup. "You're safe here," she stared at him, calculation behind her terror. "My name is Thunderhawk. This is my home." He set the water within her reach and backed away again. "You came here for a reason," the woman's eyes filled with tears. Her hand moved to her side where the bundle had been. Panic crossed her face when she didn't find it. "There," Thunderhawk pointed to the small package he'd placed on the table, wrapped in torn linen. "I did not open it." Relief visibly washed over her. She reached for the water, wincing as she moved. "They call me B," she finally said, her voice hoarse but clear. "I've been looking for you a long time." Thunderhawk's heart quickened. "Who sent you?" "A woman." B took another careful sip. "The others called her Brightwater, but she told me her real name once. In secret." The medicine pouch seemed suddenly heavy against Thunderhawk's chest. 10 years of silence, and now this stranger spoke the name he'd repeated like a prayer every night. "Bright Star," he whispered. B nodded. "She said you'd be waiting. Said you were a man of your word." Her eyes assessed him again, measuring. She was right. Thunderhawk sat on the wooden chair he'd crafted years ago, intended for his bride. From the shelf beside the fireplace, he took down a small object wrapped in soft buckskin. His hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped it, a silver hair comb, delicate flowers etched into the metal, small turquoise stones embedded along its spine. "She wore this the night we made our vow," he said, holding it in his open palm. "Where is she now?" Bee looked at the precious object, then at the man who had waited 10 years for its owner. She reached for the bundle on the table. "That's why I'm here. She needs you more than ever." Bee's fingers worked at the knots in the linen. "And she's not the only one." The storm outside had quieted, leaving only the gentle patter of raindrops on the roof. Thunderhawk stirred the fire, adding another log as Bee gathered her strength. The small cabin filled with the scent of pine and sage. "Tell me everything," he said, his deep voice steady despite the storm brewing within. Bee clutched the bundle to her chest. "First, she told me to give you this." From within the folds of linen, she withdrew a small object and held it out. A carved wooden eagle, wings spread in flight, the details worn but still visible, a talisman crafted by skilled hands. Thunderhawk's hands. The sight of it carried him back through the years, back to when he was young and fierce, before the weight of waiting had carved lines into his face. Back to a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch. "We were camped near the great river," Thunderhawk said, taking the eagle into his palm. "Our tribes had gathered for the summer trading." He closed his eyes. Seeing it all again, the circle of fires, the sound of drums, the scent of wild roses that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Bright Star was the daughter of Swift Arrow, a respected elder of the northern band. "I was a warrior who had proven himself in 3 battles. Pride tinged his voice, not for himself, but for who they had been together. Our tribes were not enemies, but not truly friends. Bee listened, her eyes never leaving his face. I saw her collecting water at dawn. Thunderhawk's voice softened. She wore blue beads in her hair that caught the first light. I had never seen anything more beautiful. The wooden eagle seemed to warm in his hand, as if absorbing the heat of memory. For 7 days, I found reasons to be where she would be. On the 8th day, she spoke to me. By the 10th, we met in secret at the edge of the camp." Thunderhawk rose and crossed to a small wooden chest in the corner. From it, he withdrew a leather satchel, aged and creased from years of handling. "On the last night before her tribe would leave, I carved this eagle." He held up the wooden figure. "It was the first time I had ever attempted to capture beauty with my knife. I gave it to her as my promise. The cabin seemed to fade around them as the past resurfaced. We pledged ourselves under the stars. I promised I would build a place where we could live in peace, away from the conflicts of our people. She promised she would return to me after telling her father." Bee's brow furrowed. "But she didn't come back." Thunderhawk's eyes darkened. "The cavalry came 3 days later. They called it a peacekeeping mission." Bitterness edged his words. "They forced her tribe north beyond the mountains, claimed it was for their protection." He returned to his chair, the leather satchel in his lap. Bright Star managed to send a message with a trader. She would honor our pledge, but needed time to convince her father. "1 year, she asked?" From the satchel, Thunderhawk withdrew a faded piece of paper, unfolding it with reverent care. The charcoal drawing showed a simple image, a cabin beside a distinctive rock formation, with a tree-lined stream nearby. "I found this place. Built everything just as we had planned. And I waited." His voice remained steady, though his eyes betrayed his pain. 1 year became 2. 2 became 5. I sent messages whenever I could find someone traveling north. None were ever answered. Bee looked away, as if the weight of his faithfulness was almost too much to witness. "The tribes were being moved constantly," she said softly. "Many messages were lost in those years." Thunderhawk carefully refolded the drawing. "I told myself she must be dead. Nothing else would have kept her from her promise." "She tried," Bee whispered. "Many times." The wooden eagle caught the firelight, casting a winged shadow across the wall. 10 years I have lived in this place. 10 years of standing at that eastern fence watching for her. Thunderhawk's eyes met Bee's, a sudden fierceness returning to them. "Now you come, carrying her token. Tell me, where is my bright star? What keeps her from my side?" Bee placed the bundle on the table between them, her hands steadier now. "She was taken," she said, the words falling like stones. "Captured by men who raid the northern territories for slaves. Men who sell human beings to the plantations of the south." Thunderhawk went still, his hand closing around the wooden eagle until his knuckles whitened. "She lives still," Bee continued, "but in chains. On a plantation in Louisiana, she began to unwrap the bundle, and she was not alone when they took her." Thunderhawk's hand hovered above the bundle on the table, hesitant, as if touching it might shatter the moment into irretrievable pieces. Outside, the storm had circled back, wind whistling through the cedar trees that surrounded his property. Not alone. His voice barely carried above the rain. Bee nodded, her eyes filled with meaning. "Let me start from the beginning. You need to understand what happened that night." She reached for the bundle again, but instead of opening it, she removed something from her pocket, a small cloth sack, stained and worn. From it, she withdrew a single blue bead, the color of twilight sky. "Bright Star wore these in her hair when they took her," Bee explained. "She managed to hide this one. Said it reminded her of the morning you first saw her." Thunderhawk stared at the bead, remembering. The same blue that had caught the dawn light all those years ago. "It was a night much like this," Bee continued, glancing toward the window where lightning illuminated the downpour. "The storm came sudden while her people were moving camp." The blue bead caught the firelight as Bee rolled it between her fingers. "The small object carrying the weight of a decade's sorrow. Riders came with the storm. White men with rifles and ropes." Her voice hardened. "They attacked at night, took 7 women and 3 men. Bright Star fought. She told me she wounded 2 of them. But there were too many." Thunderhawk's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "They traveled south for weeks. Chained, walking behind horses." Bee's eyes grew distant. 3 died on the journey. The others were sold at an auction in New Orleans." Thunderhawk stood abruptly, moving to the window. His reflection stared back at him, the face of a man who had been building a home while his woman suffered in chains. The knowledge clawed at him like a physical pain. Bright Star was purchased by a man named Beauregard Hammond. Bee's voice had dropped to a near whisper. "Owner of Willow Creek Plantation in Louisiana." The storm outside seemed to respond to the name. "Thunder rolling across the plains. Hammond collects people he considers unusual." Disgust colored Bee's words. "Called Bright Star his savage beauty. Changed her name to Brightwater, dressed her in fine clothes, kept her separate from the field workers." Thunderhawk turned, his expression dangerous. "He touched her." Bee held his gaze. "He claimed her as his property, but Bright Star never broke, never surrendered her spirit. Even when it would have been easier." She placed the blue bead on the table beside the still-wrapped bundle. "I was brought to the plantation 5 years ago. Worked in the main house." Bee's fingers traced a faded scar on her wrist. "Bright Star and I shared quarters in the back wing. At night, she would tell me about you, about the man who was building her a home in the West, about the life that waited beyond the plantation walls." Thunderhawk returned to the table, his movements measured, controlled. "How did you escape?" he asked. Bee's hand moved to her neck, where a thin silver chain disappeared beneath her tattered collar. She pulled it out to reveal a small brass key dangling from the end. This opened Hammond's study, where he kept important papers. The key glinted in the firelight. "Including these." She finally unwrapped the bundle, revealing a stack of letters bound with twine, the paper yellowed with age. Thunderhawk recognized the neat, precise handwriting immediately. "Bright Star wrote these," he whispered. "Every month for years," Bee confirmed. "Hammond intercepted them all. Kept them locked away like trophies." Thunderhawk touched the top letter with trembling fingers, seeing his name written in Bright Star's hand. "When I found them, I knew I had to bring them to you." Bee's voice strengthened with resolve. Bright Star had tried for so long to reach you. She deserved to have her words delivered. Outside, a particularly violent gust rattled the shutters. The brass key swung from Bee's necklace, catching the light. "But there's more than letters here," Bee said, her hand moving to separate the stack, revealing something nestled beneath the correspondence. "Something Hammond doesn't know about. Something that changes everything." Thunderhawk stared as Bee's hands carefully unwrapped a final piece of cloth, revealing a small moccasin, Apache in design but tiny, made for a child. "Bright Star wasn't alone when they took her," Bee said softly. "She was carrying your child." The tiny moccasin lay between them on the table, impossibly small against Thunderhawk's weathered hand as he reached to touch it. The leather was soft, supple, decorated with beadwork in patterns of his tribe. Work done by Bright Star's hands, teaching their traditions even in captivity. "A child," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "My child." Bee watched his face transform, decades of patience giving way to urgent need. "A daughter," she said, "strong and clever like her mother. She's 10 now." Thunderhawk looked up sharply. "She lives?" "Yes." Bee shifted, wincing as the movement disturbed her injuries. A metal band circled her ankle, the skin beneath raw and bloodied. Thunderhawk noticed it for the first time. Not a bracelet, but a broken shackle, its chain cut, but the iron cuff still locked in place. He rose immediately, returning with a small pot of salve and clean bandages. "Let me tend to this properly," he said, kneeling beside her chair. As he worked, his mind filled with questions. "My daughter." "What is her name?" "Morning Light," Bee replied. Though on the plantation they call her Dawn, Thunderhawk's hands stilled. Morning Light, a name that honored both their tribes' traditions. Bright Star had remembered everything. "Hammond doesn't know," Bee continued, her voice lowered despite their solitude. "Bright Star never told him who the father was. He assumes it was someone from her tribe before capture. The iron shackle was cruelly tight, embedded in swollen flesh. Thunderhawk examined it carefully, then retrieved tools from a nearby shelf. "This will hurt," he warned, positioning a metal file against the lock mechanism. Bee nodded, bracing herself. "I've endured worse." As he worked at freeing her, Bee continued. "Bright Star protected the child by making herself valuable. She learned English quickly, became useful in the main house." Her voice hardened. "Hammond thinks he broke her spirit." "He's wrong." The shackle's lock gave way with a metallic snap, releasing its grip. Thunderhawk gently removed it, revealing the full extent of damage beneath, a permanent reminder etched into Bee's skin. He applied salve to the wound with careful fingers. "How did you escape?" he asked. Bee touched a thin scar that ran from her temple to her jaw. 3 weeks ago, Hammond decided to sell Morning Light." Thunderhawk's head snapped up, his eyes darkening. "The neighboring plantation owner has a son, 13 years old. Hammond thought he'd curry favor by offering your daughter as a companion." The disgust in Bee's voice was palpable. "When Bright Star found out, she made plans. I was to take Morning Light and run, but the child is not with you," Thunderhawk observed, finishing the bandage. "We were discovered." Bee's hand drifted to her scar again. "The overseer caught us at the property line. In the struggle, I was injured. Morning Light was taken back to the house." She reached into her tattered dress and withdrew a folded paper, creased and water-stained but intact. As she unfolded it, Thunderhawk saw a crude map drawn in charcoal. "Bright Star gave me this. The route to your ranch, marked with safe houses along the way." Bee traced the path with her finger. "I memorized it, then hid it inside my shoe. When I could walk again, I broke into Hammond's study, stole the letters, and ran." Thunderhawk studied the map, recognizing landmarks, the great river, the mountain pass. Trading posts where he had sent messages years ago. "Hammond will kill her for helping me escape," Bee said. The words falling between them like stones. Thunderhawk stood, his decision already made. "Then we leave at first light." "We?" Bee looked startled. "The journey nearly killed me coming north. Going back is—" "I have waited 10 years, Thunderhawk interrupted, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "I will not wait 1 day more." He moved to a trunk in the corner, throwing it open to reveal items he hadn't touched in a decade. Hunting knives, a bow, a quiver of arrows, and a worn leather belt adorned with coop feathers earned in battle. "The man who waits is gone," he said. lifting the war belt from its resting place. Tonight, Strikes Without Sound returns. B watched as he tied the belt around his waist, the transformation visible in his bearing. The patient rancher receded, replaced by the warrior of his youth. Hammond has 20 armed men guarding the plantation, she warned. And dogs trained to hunt humans. Thunderhawk's smile was cold as winter. Then they should be afraid of what hunts them. He returned to the table, taking up the tiny moccasin and tucking it carefully into the medicine pouch at his chest. Rest, he told B. Heal. Tomorrow we begin the journey south. B hesitated. What if we're too late? Thunderhawk looked to the letters on the table, to the iron shackle now broken beside them. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of mountains. Then Hammond will learn what it means to take from an Apache. Dawn broke over the eastern plains, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. Thunderhawk had not slept. Instead, he had prepared, gathering supplies, checking his weapons, packing only what they would need for the journey south. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Now, as the first light crept through the windows, he sat at the table with Bright Star's letters spread before him. 10 years of words never delivered, of hopes never shared. The twine that had bound them lay coiled like a snake beside the stack. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the first letter, dated just 3 months after they had parted. My beloved Thunderhawk, I write though I do not know if these words will ever reach you. We were taken north beyond the mountains, then east to lands I do not recognize. My father says we must accept the White Father's decision, that resistance means death for our people. But I have not forgotten our promise beneath the stars. When the moon is full again, I will begin my journey to you. 3 young men from our tribe have agreed to guide me. We will travel by night, avoiding the soldiers' camps. Wait for me, my love. I am coming, Bright Star. The next letter was dated 6 weeks later, the handwriting less certain, the paper stained with what might have been tears. Thunderhawk disaster. We were discovered leaving camp. The soldiers were waiting. Someone betrayed us. The young men were beaten. I was brought before the agent who says I am not to leave again. They will move us farther north within days, but I will find another way. Our promise holds. Bright Star letter after letter chronicled her attempts, her determination, her refusal to surrender their dream. Thunderhawk read each one, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was coming. The capture, the auction block, the plantation. The 8th letter was different, written on finer paper, the ink more elaborate. My Thunderhawk, I write from a place of shadows. I've been taken by men who trade in human lives. They came in the night like evil spirits, took many of us. I fought, but there were too many. They call me by a new name now, dress me in strange clothes, and speak of selling me like a horse at trading. I hide this letter with a woman who is being sent to market tomorrow. She has promised to find someone traveling west. Do not forsake our promise. I will survive. I will find a way back to you. I carry a precious secret that gives me strength. The stars blessed us before we parted. A new life grows within me. Our child will be born in the coming winter. Find me, my love. I am in a city called New Orleans. Bright Star Thunderhawk's hand clenched around the letter, the paper crinkling beneath his fingers. A child conceived in love, born in captivity. His jaw tightened as he set the letter aside and reached for another. This one was written in a different hand. English letters carefully formed, as if Bright Star had been learning the new language. Thunderhawk, our daughter was born as the first snow fell. I named her Morning Light, for she came with the dawn after the longest night of the year. She has your eyes, your strong spirit. I am now at a place called Willow Creek Plantation. The owner, Hammond, believes I am exotic, a curiosity. He keeps me in the main house, away from the field workers. I have learned their tongue quickly. Knowledge is survival. I tell Morning Light stories of her father, the brave Apache who waits for us beyond the western mountains. She's too young to understand, but someday she will know who she truly is. I have convinced a traveling peddler to carry this letter west. If you receive it, send word somehow. Let me know you still wait. Bright Star. The sun had fully risen by the time Thunderhawk reached the final letter, dated just 2 months earlier. The handwriting was hurried, the words urgent. "My beloved, danger comes. Hammond means to sell our daughter to the son of a neighboring plantation owner. The boy is known for cruelty. I cannot allow this. I have befriended a house servant named B who has agreed to help. We will attempt escape when the moon is dark. If we cannot all go, I will send B with morning light to find you. Trust her as you would trust me. If you receive this, be ready. Our daughter has your strength and my determination. She deserves freedom. I have never stopped loving you, not for a single moment in all these years." Bright Star Thunderhawk carefully refolded the letters, placing them in a leather pouch. Each word was precious, testimony to a love that had endured impossible hardship. "She never gave up," B said quietly from the doorway, watching him. "Not once in 10 years. Thunderhawk secured the pouch inside his shirt, close to his heart. "Neither did I," B nodded toward the window. "The porters are coming. I see their wagon on the road." Thunderhawk rose, his expression resolute. "Good. We'll need their help." The porter's wagon rattled to a stop before Thunderhawk's cabin. Mason Porter, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard, raised his hand in greeting. His wife, Hannah, sat beside him, her curious eyes taking in the unusual sight of a stranger at Thunderhawk's door. "Wasn't expecting to see you for another month," Thunderhawk said as Mason climbed down. "Storm washed out the bridge at Eagle Creek," Mason explained. "Had to take the northern route." His gaze settled on B, who stood half hidden in the doorway. "I see you've got company." Thunderhawk nodded. "This is B. She's brought news. From the south, understanding passed between the men. The Porters were among the few settlers who quietly opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western Territories. "Hannah!" Mason called to his wife. "Bring that bundle of clothes we were taking to the mission." Hannah Porter approached with cautious kindness, offering B a wrapped package. "These might fit you better than what you're wearing, dear." While B changed inside, Thunderhawk explained the situation in low tones. Mason's expression grew increasingly grim. "Louisiana's a long way," he said finally, "and not friendly to your kind, nor to escaped slaves." "I have no choice," Thunderhawk replied. Mason nodded. "Didn't say I wouldn't help." He reached into his wagon and withdrew a wooden box the size of a small book. "Might need this then." The box was simply made, but had a brass lock that gleamed in the morning sun. Mason produced a key and opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a Navy Colt revolver. 6 shots, Mason said. Accurate at 30 yards in the right hands. Thunderhawk had seen such weapons, but never held one. The gun represented everything he had resisted about the changing world, yet now it might be the difference between life and death for his family. "I can't accept this," he said. Mason closed the box and pressed it into Thunderhawk's hands. "You can and you will. Where you're going, a bow won't be enough." Inside the cabin, Hannah helped B dress in a simple but clean cotton dress. As they emerged, Thunderhawk was surprised by the transformation. Without the mud and tattered clothes, B stood straighter, her dignity restored. "I've asked the Porters for help," Thunderhawk told her. B nodded cautiously. "Can they be trusted?" "With our lives," he assured her. They gathered around the table where Bright Star's letters lay in their leather pouch. Hannah poured coffee while Mason spread out a weathered map. "You'll need to avoid the main route south," Mason said. "Army patrols are thick along the Santa Fe Trail, and slave catchers watch the river crossings." He traced a winding path with his finger. "This way follows game trails through the hill country. Longer but safer." Thunderhawk studied the route.
"How long?"
3 weeks if you push hard," Mason estimated. "Maybe a month with rest days." B's face fell. "Too long. Hammond plans to sell Morning Light at the summer auction." "That's less than 3 weeks away." Hannah Porter reached into her skirts and withdrew a small object that caught the light, a gold locket on a fine chain. She opened it to reveal a tiny painted portrait of a solemn-eyed child. "My daughter," she said softly. "Lost to fever 5 winters ago." She closed the locket and pressed it into B's hand. "This might help you. A woman traveling with a white couple draws less attention than a woman with an Indian." Thunderhawk understood immediately. "You're suggesting we pose as travelers?" "Together." Mason nodded. Hannah and I were heading to St. Louis anyway. We could take you as far as the Mississippi. They'd never believe an Apache and a runaway slave are with you by choice, Thunderhawk objected. They would if you were property, Mason said grimly. Papers can be forged. Not pleasant to consider, but it would get you through checkpoints. The suggestion hung heavy in the air. To pose as a slave, even falsely, went against everything Thunderhawk believed in. Yet for his daughter, for Bright Star, B clutched Hannah's locket. I've worn real chains. I can pretend a while longer if it saves morning light. Thunderhawk looked at the wooden box containing the revolver. How soon can we leave? Dawn tomorrow, Mason replied. We'll need tonight to prepare the papers and arrange the wagon. As the porters left to make preparations, B opened Hannah's locket again, studying the painted child within. Morning light has your eyes, she said to Thunderhawk, and your stubborn chin. But her smile, that's all Bright Star. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a small deerskin pouch. I've saved this for when you were ready. From the pouch, she produced a lock of black hair, tied with a thread of red wool. Your daughter's, B said. Bright Star cut it on her last birthday. She said Apache fathers should know their children, even when separated by great distance. Thunderhawk took the small lock of hair, his fingers trembling. Physical proof of his child, a daughter who carried his blood but had never known his name. Tell me about her, he whispered. She's strong, B said, a smile warming her face. Fearless. She sneaks away to watch the stars every night. Bright Star taught her to find the warrior constellation, said that's where her father lives. Thunderhawk closed his hand around his daughter's hair, a fierce protective love surging through him. Not in the stars, he said. I'm coming for her now. The pre-dawn air carried the scent of sage and pine as Thunderhawk secured the last bundle to Mason Porter's wagon. He had spent the night sorting through a decade of possessions, taking only what was necessary: weapons, medicine, tools that might mean survival on the long road south. The home he had built for Bright Star stood silent, its door locked, its future uncertain. You understand what this means, Mason said quietly, adjusting the harness on his team of horses. You might never return here, Thunderhawk nodded. This place was only ever a waiting room. My home is with my family. From the cabin emerged Hannah and B. The transformation of the runaway slave continued to surprise him. Dressed in a simple blue traveling dress, with her hair neatly braided, B looked the part of a lady's companion rather than a fugitive. Only the healing wounds on her ankle and the wariness in her eyes revealed her true story. Hannah approached, carrying something flat and rectangular wrapped in oilskin. I finished these last night, she said, handing the package to her husband. Mason unwrapped it, revealing several official-looking documents. The paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was fresh, the handwriting meticulous. He displayed them for Thunderhawk's inspection. Sale of property papers, Mason explained. Dated 3 years ago in St. Louis. According to these, I purchased both of you legally. Thunderhawk's face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened at the words. Even as pretense, it cut deeply. This one names you as Thomas Hawk. Mason continued. A Cherokee scout trained to track runaways. He looked apologetically at Thunderhawk. Most white folks can't tell one tribe from another. Cherokee are more accepted in border territories. Thunderhawk took the papers, studying the elaborate script that reduced him to property. And B? Simply Beatrice, purchased as a lady's maid. Mason pointed to an elaborate seal at the bottom of each document. The forgery's good. My brother's a clerk at the county office. Borrowed the official stamps. The forged papers represented both their shield and their chains for the journey ahead. Thunderhawk carefully folded them and tucked them inside his shirt. Remember, Mason cautioned, once we cross into Missouri, you aren't Apache anymore. You're Cherokee, and you answer to Thomas. Keep your speech simple. Don't look white men in the eye. Thunderhawk had lived among settlers long enough to understand their expectations. I know how to play their game. It's not a game down south, Mason warned. It's life and death. As they made final preparations, B approached Thunderhawk, holding something in her cupped hands. Before we go, you should have this. She opened her palms to reveal a crude compass fashioned from a magnetized needle floating in a small cork disc in a water-filled tin. The top was covered with a piece of clear glass, its edge sealed with beeswax. Bright Star made this, Bee explained. She learned about compasses from a book in Hammond's library. Said every traveler needs to know their true direction. Thunderhawk took the makeshift compass, watching the needle swing until it settled, pointing north. Such a simple thing, yet it represented Bright Star's resourcefulness, her determination, her refusal to remain lost. She made it for morning light, Bee continued, to help her find her way to you if they were separated. I took it the night we tried to escape. The small compass felt heavy in Thunderhawk's palm, his daughter's intended guide to freedom, now his guide to find her. Dawn's breaking, Mason called. We need to move. Thunderhawk took a final look at the ranch he'd built, the fence posts marking the eastern boundary where he had waited each morning, the barn where he'd imagined teaching his child to ride, the home constructed to hold a family that never came. You built all this yourself? Bee asked, following his gaze. Every post, every plank. His voice was steady despite the ache in his chest. I'll build another, wherever they are. As he turned to the wagon, a movement in the trees caught his eye. A figure on horseback watched from the edge of the property, sharp knife. An elder from a nearby Apache band who occasionally traded with Thunderhawk. Thunderhawk approached the old warrior, speaking in their native tongue. I go to find my woman and child. Sharpknife's weathered face remained expressionless, but his eyes held understanding. The waiting one finally moves. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a worn leather object, a gun belt with an ancient flintlock pistol. Spanish iron, Sharpknife said, taken from a soldier who tried to claim our hunting grounds. One shot, but the white men fear its sound. Thunderhawk accepted the gift with appropriate reverence. I may not return. All paths lead somewhere, Sharpknife replied. Find your blood. The land remains. With this blessing from his people, Thunderhawk joined the others at the wagon. Anna sat in the front with Mason, while Thunderhawk and Bee took their places in the back, partially hidden by canvas and supplies. As the wagon pulled away, Thunderhawk held Bright Star's compass in his palm, watching the needle point steadfastly south. We're coming, he whispered to the rising sun. Wait for us now. 4 days into their journey, the landscape began to change. The open plains gave way to rolling hills, dotted with settlements. With each mile south, Thunderhawk felt the weight of civilization pressing in around them. More farms, more towns, more curious eyes. They made camp beside a narrow creek, far enough from the trail to avoid unwanted attention. As Mason tended the horses, Thunderhawk gathered firewood, moving silently through the underbrush. His Apache upbringing made him nearly invisible in the dappled forest light, a shadow among shadows. You still move like a warrior, Bee observed when he returned to camp. She sat mending a tear in her dress, her fingers working the needle with practiced skill. Some things cannot be forgotten, Thunderhawk replied, arranging the wood for a small, smokeless fire. Nor should they be. Hannah Porter approached, carrying a kettle of water. We'll reach Jefferson City tomorrow, she said. First real test of our story. Mason joined them, unfolding a stained map. Army checkpoint at the river crossing. They'll inspect our papers. He looked at Thunderhawk. From now on, you need to start living as Thomas. Thunderhawk nodded, understanding the necessity. He reached for his possessions and removed his medicine pouch, the one containing the lock of his daughter's hair and the small wooden eagle from Bright Star. Such items would immediately mark him as Apache. Keep it, Bee said, watching him. Hide it, but keep it close. She reached into her own bundle and withdrew a small object wrapped in faded calico. I have something of hers too, she confessed, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a small cornhusk doll dressed in scraps of blue and white fabric. The doll's face was simply drawn with charcoal, but its clothing had been crafted with care. Tiny moccasins, a miniature dress, even a small blanket tied across its back. Morning Light made this, Bee explained. Bright Star taught her how using stories of your people, Hammond's daughter saw it once and demanded one for herself. Her fingers traced the doll's simple features. Bright Star stayed up 3 nights making a different doll for the white child. This one she kept hidden. Thunderhawk studied the small creation. His daughter's hands had shaped this, guided by Bright Star's memories of their culture. In the simple doll, he saw determination, resistance, the quiet preservation of identity. They couldn't take everything from her, Bee said softly. She made sure Morning Light knew who she really was. Thunderhawk carefully returned the doll to Bee. You kept this safe all this way. Morning Light asked me to. Bee rewrapped the doll and tucked it away. Said her father would want to see what she made. The evening deepened around them, stars appearing in the darkening sky. Mason took first watch while the others prepared for sleep. Thunderhawk sat apart, studying Bright Star's homemade compass by firelight. May I join you? Hannah asked, approaching with 2 cups of tea. Thunderhawk nodded, accepting the offered drink. Hannah Porter was a quiet woman, observant but not intrusive. She had treated both him and Bee with simple dignity from the first moment. Mason says you built your ranch entirely alone, she said. Yes. For a woman you hadn't seen in 10 years. It wasn't a question, but Thunderhawk answered anyway. For my family. Hannah studied him over the rim of her cup. Most men would have given up. Taken another wife. I'm not most men. Thunderhawk's voice remained level. And Bright Star is not most women. A small smile touched Hannah's lips. No, I don't imagine she is. She glanced toward Bee, who had fallen asleep near the fire. To inspire such loyalty in both of you. They sat in comfortable silence until Hannah spoke again. I lost a child, she said simply. Our daughter, Emma. Thunderhawk recalled the locket with the painted portrait. I know. What you may not know is that we almost lost each other afterward. Hannah's voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected old pain. Grief can either bind people together or tear them apart. Thunderhawk considered her words. You and Mason found the better path. We did. But it wasn't easy. She set down her empty cup. When you find them, your Bright Star and Morning Light, remember that 10 years leaves marks. You've all changed in ways you can't yet understand. Before Thunderhawk could respond, Mason returned to the camp, his expression tense. Riders on the road, he reported. Military patrol by the look of them. Thunderhawk immediately doused the fire. Will they search for campers? Depends on what they're after. Mason helped Hannah to her feet. Better not risk it. Back up, we'll move deeper into the woods. They worked quickly, erasing signs of their presence. Bee gathered their cooking items while Thunderhawk scattered the ashes. Within minutes, the campsite was empty, the wagon ready to move. As Thunderhawk helped Bee onto the wagon, he noticed her wince. Your ankle? She nodded, lips pressed tight against the pain. Thunderhawk reached into his pack and removed a leather bundle. Unwrapping it revealed a collection of dried herbs, roots, and powders, his medicine kit. With practiced hands, he mixed several ingredients with a small amount of water. This will help with pain and swelling, he said, applying the poultice to her ankle. As Mason guided the wagon through the darkness, Thunderhawk watched the road behind them, alert for pursuit. They were entering dangerous territory now, a place where his warrior skills might mean the difference between freedom and chains, or between life and death. Jefferson City loomed before them, a collection of brick buildings and wooden structures sprawled along the Missouri River. The military checkpoint stood at the bridge crossing, soldiers in blue uniforms examining papers, inspecting wagons, questioning travelers. Remember, Mason said quietly as they approached. You're Thomas Hawk now. Speak only when spoken to. Thunderhawk nodded, pulling his hat lower. He had exchanged his buckskin shirt for a worn cotton one, though he kept his Apache knife hidden beneath it. Beside him, Bee kept her eyes downcast, playing her role with the practiced caution of someone who had learned survival through submission. A young lieutenant raised his hand, signaling for their wagon to stop. Papers and destination, he demanded, barely glancing at Hannah. Mason handed over the forged documents. St. Louis, he said. Visiting my wife's sister. The officer examined the papers with bored efficiency. His gaze flicked to Thunderhawk. What's the Indian for? Tracker, Mason replied easily. Had some trouble with runaways on my property back west. Thomas here has a gift for finding those who don't want to be found. The lieutenant's interest sharpened. Cherokee says here. Thunderhawk gave a single nod, careful to keep his eyes respectfully lowered, as Mason had instructed. You understand English, Indian? Yes, sir, Thunderhawk replied. His accent deliberately thickened. I track good. The lieutenant seemed satisfied. He turned his attention to B. And this one? My wife's maid, Mason explained. Hannah's health is delicate. Beatrice tends to her needs. The officer circled the wagon, his gaze lingering on their supplies. There've been some trouble with abolitionists moving slaves north, he commented. You folks wouldn't know anything about that, would you? We're God-fearing people, Lieutenant, Hannah interjected, her voice carrying just the right note of genteel offense. We don't meddle in politics. The officer handed back their papers. On your way, then. Curfew for coloreds is sundown. Make sure your property is secured by then. As they crossed the bridge, Thunderhawk felt the weight of the lieutenant's stare on his back. Playing a role diminished by white society cut deeper than he'd expected. Not for the first time, he wondered how Bright Star had endured far worse for years. They purchased supplies in town, then continued east. As dusk approached, they made camp in a secluded grove. The day's tension lingered, leaving them all quiet as they prepared the evening meal. After dinner, Bee motioned Thunderhawk to join her by the fire. From her dress pocket, she withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and creased from repeated handling. I've been waiting for the right time to share this, she said. She carefully unfolded the paper to reveal a page torn from a book. Handwritten notes filled the margins in a script Thunderhawk immediately recognized as Bright Stars. She tore this from Hammond's ledger, Bee explained. His record of slaves purchased and sold. Thunderhawk stared at the document. Columns of names, ages, prices paid, human beings reduced to inventory. In the third row, an entry stood out. Female Apache, 19 years. $650. He named her Bright Water because of her eyes, Bee continued. Said they reminded him of sun on a clear lake. Made her valuable, exotic. Thunderhawk's fingers hovered over Bright Star's name, not quite touching the paper. His eyes moved to the margin notes, written in Apache symbols interspersed with English letters. A code only someone from their tribe might understand. She wrote our story here, he said softly, tracing the symbols. Our meeting, our promise? My Apache name, Bee nodded. She kept this hidden for years, added to it whenever she could steal a moment alone. It was her way of remembering who she really was. She pointed to other entries on the page. These marks track Morning Light's growth. First steps, first words. The painful ledger transformed by Bright Star's hand had become a family record. Defiance hidden in plain sight. Heritage preserved in the margins of captivity. Hammond caught her writing once, Bee continued. Said it looked like devil marks. Threatened to cut off her fingers if he saw it again. Her voice hardened. She waited until his back was turned, then kept writing. Thunderhawk carefully refolded the precious document. She is stronger than I imagined. She had to be. Bee took back the page, tucking it safely away. Morning Light is the same. Hammond thinks she's obedient, but that girl has her father's spirit. Watches everything. Misses nothing. Pride mixed with sorrow in Thunderhawk's chest. His daughter had inherited his warrior nature, yet had been forced to channel it into quiet resistance rather than open strength. When Hammond decided to sell her to the Wilkersons, Bee continued, Morning Light didn't cry. She asked questions. How far was the Wilkerson plantation? How many guards? Whether there were dogs? A smile touched her lips. She was planning her escape before she even arrived. Just 10 years old and already thinking like an Apache, Thunderhawk finished. Mason approached, interrupting their conversation. We should reach the Mississippi in 3 days, he said. I've been thinking on our route south from there. He spread his map on a flat rock. The river would be fastest, but steamboats require too many questions, too many papers. Overland through Tennessee would be safer. Thunderhawk studied the map, measuring distances with his eye. How long? 2 weeks to the Louisiana border, Mason estimated. Then perhaps another week to Willow Creek Plantation, nearly a month in total, cutting it dangerously close to Hammond's planned auction. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. Too long. I might know a faster way, Bee interjected. She pointed to the map. There's a network of people who help slaves escape north. Some of those same people might help us move south. Mason looked skeptical. The Underground Railroad runs north, not south. The people running it care about freedom, Bee insisted. They might understand our purpose. Hannah joined them, listening quietly. It would be dangerous, she said, for everyone involved. More dangerous than what awaits if we're too late. Thunderhawk asked. The question hung in the night air, unanswered but understood. For Morning Light and Bright Star, they would risk everything. For family, no journey was impossible. The small Quaker settlement appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, a cluster of simple wooden buildings surrounded by neatly tended fields. A sign marked it as Peaceful Valley, though Thunderhawk noted it had no natural valley to speak of. Bee had directed them here, following information embedded in Bright Star's coded messages. Are you certain? Mason asked as they approached. Quakers are peaceable folk, but harboring runaways carries heavy penalties. Bee nodded. Bright Star marked this place. That a man named Elijah Fisher helped 3 women from Willow Creek reach freedom. They stopped the wagon before a modest 2-story house at the settlement's edge. A tall, slender man with a gray beard and plain black clothing emerged from the doorway. His keen eyes took in their party with a single glance. Friends, he greeted them, using the Quaker term with careful neutrality. What brings thee to our community? Mason stepped forward. We seek Elijah Fisher. I am he. The man's expression revealed nothing, but his gaze lingered on Thunderhawk and Bee. Perhaps this conversation is better continued indoors. Inside the austere home, Thunderhawk noted the lack of ornamentation. No paintings, no decorative items, save for a large family Bible on a reading stand. Elijah Fisher closed the shutters before addressing them again. Thee travels an unusual path, he observed. 2 white settlers accompanied by those who would typically be considered property. We're heading south, Mason explained. To Louisiana, Fisher's eyebrows rose slightly. Most seeking my assistance travel in the opposite direction. We're not most people, Thunderhawk said, speaking for the first time. Fisher studied him. No, I can see that thee is not. He turned to Bee. And thee, sister, what brings thee back toward the land of bondage? A promise, Bee replied, to a woman named Bright Star. She calls herself Bright Water now on Hammond's plantation. Recognition flashed in Fisher's eyes. The Apache woman, he nodded slowly. I remember. 3 years ago, she helped 2 house servants escape. Took their punishment without revealing their destination, Thunderhawk straightened. You've met her? Once, briefly. Fisher gestured for them to sit at a plain wooden table. I smuggled medicine to the plantation during a fever outbreak. Hammond allowed it, pragmatism overcoming prejudice when half his workforce lay ill. A woman entered silently, setting a kettle to boil on the stove before slipping out again. Bright Star tended the sick, Fisher continued. She recognized the mark of our network on my wagon and passed me a message for a family separated at auction. His voice softened. She showed exceptional courage. She is my wife, Thunderhawk said simply. Fisher's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his composed demeanor. Indeed. Then thee undertakes a rescue. Our daughter is with her, Thunderhawk confirmed. Both will be sold at the summer auction if we don't reach them in time. Fisher rose and crossed to a wooden cabinet. From a hidden compartment behind a false panel, he withdrew a small book bound in faded brown leather, its corners worn smooth from handling. He placed it on the table between them. This contains safe routes and contacts, he explained. Friends who assist those seeking freedom. He opened the book, revealing pages of hand-drawn maps with symbols and notations. It was never intended for southward journeys, but the paths remain the same. Thunderhawk recognized the tremendous risk the Quaker took in showing them this information. Why help us? Fisher's gaze was steady. All souls deserve freedom, friend. Direction of travel does not change this truth. The woman returned with tea and fresh bread. As she served them, Fisher introduced her as his wife, Ruth. Unlike her husband, she smiled openly at their guests. "How old is thy child?" she asked Thunderhawk. 10, he answered. "I have never seen her face." Ruth's expression softened. "Then thee must not delay." She exchanged a meaningful look with her husband. Fisher nodded. "We received word yesterday. Slave catchers patrol the main roads to the Mississippi." He indicated a route on his map. "Thee must take this path instead. My son will guide thee." As they discussed details, Ruth disappeared upstairs, returning with a small handcrafted wooden box. She presented it to Bee. "For the child," she said, "and for thee." Bee opened the box to reveal a simple silver thimble, a small pair of scissors, and several needles pressed into a flannel cushion. Beneath these lay 2 folded documents. "Freedom papers," Ruth explained. "The real kind, properly notarized." She placed a gentle hand on Bee's shoulder. "One bears thy description. The other can be altered to fit the child," Fisher finished. "If thee succeeds," Thunderhawk understood the value of what was being offered, not just tools and safe passage, but the legal documents that could protect Morning Light and Bee afterward. "These papers represent 2 souls our network could not save in time," Fisher said solemnly. "The woman who carried this thimble died reaching for freedom. Her memory lives in each stitch it helps create." Bee clutched the sewing box, its humble contents more precious than gold. "I will honor her journey with mine." Fisher's son, a young man with his father's height and his mother's kind eyes, entered the room. "The back roads are clear," he reported. "We can leave at nightfall." As they finalized their plans, Thunderhawk felt the first real hope since beginning their journey. They had allies now, people who understood that freedom was worth any risk, any sacrifice. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine holding his daughter. "Seeing bright stars face again after 10 years of separation, when thee finds them," Ruth said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "Remember that freedom of the body is only the beginning. The spirit takes longer to heal." Thunderhawk nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. The journey to Louisiana was only the first challenge. The journey home, in all its meanings, would be longer still. The Mississippi River stretched before them like a great serpent, its muddy waters churning beneath the morning light. They had traveled for 10 days since leaving the Quaker settlement, guided through hidden paths by Elijah Fisher's son, Samuel. The porter's wagon now stood concealed among dense trees on the western bank, while Thunderhawk and the others surveyed the crossing point. "This is as far as I can take you," Samuel said, his voice low. "Across the river you enter territory where the law favors slaveholders above all others." Mason nodded grimly. "We understand the risk. The ferryman is expecting you," Samuel continued. "Show him this." He handed Mason a small wooden token carved with the simple image of a bird in flight. "He'll know you come from friends." As they prepared for the crossing, Thunderhawk noticed Bee standing apart, her gaze fixed on the eastern shore. The fear in her posture was unmistakable. She was crossing back into the territory from which she had fled at such great cost. He approached her quietly. "We can find another way if this is too difficult." Bee shook her head. "There is no other way fast enough." Her fingers clutched the small sewing box Ruth Fisher had given her. "I just never thought I'd willingly return to that side of the river." Thunderhawk understood. Every mile south brought him closer to his family, but also to the institutions that had stolen 10 years from them. "I'll protect you," he promised, "as you have protected knowledge of my daughter." Their moment was interrupted by Hannah Porter's approach. "Samuel says we should separate here," she explained. "Less conspicuous in smaller groups." The plan was simple but dangerous. Mason and Hannah would cross first with the wagon, maintaining their cover as a couple traveling to visit family. Thunderhawk and Bee would follow an hour later, posing as their servants sent to fetch forgotten supplies. As they made final preparations, Mason pulled Thunderhawk aside. From his coat he withdrew a folded square of paper sealed with wax. "When you reach Louisiana, Mason said. "Find a man named Jerome Baptiste in New Orleans. He trades with the river plantations." He pressed the sealed letter into Thunderhawk's hand. "This identifies you as my agent. Baptiste can provide information about Willow Creek that might help your approach." Thunderhawk tucked the letter inside his shirt. "You've risked much for strangers." Mason's weathered face softened. "Not strangers, friends." He clasped Thunderhawk's shoulder. "We'll wait 3 days at the Crossroads Inn east of the river. If you don't arrive by then, we'll continue to Baptiste's and arrange help from there." The ferryman proved true to Samuel's word. Upon seeing the wooden bird token, he nodded curtly and arranged their passage without questions. The crossing itself was tense but uneventful, the muddy waters of the Mississippi serving as both physical and symbolic boundary between different worlds. By nightfall, Thunderhawk and Bee had rejoined the porters at a small roadside inn. Their room was sparse but private, allowing them to speak freely for the first time since the crossing. "We're in slave territory now," Mason warned as they gathered around a small table. "The rules are different here. Patrollers can stop anyone with dark skin, demand papers, search without cause." Hannah spread Fisher's map on the table. Samuel marked the safe houses between here and Louisiana. They're farther apart than in Missouri, more dangerous to maintain. As they studied the route, a knock at the door silenced them. Mason motioned for Thunderhawk and Bee to move out of sight before answering. A young black man, in simple livery, stood in the hallway. "Begging your pardon, sir," he said to Mason. "The innkeeper asked me to deliver this." He handed over a tarnished metal disc the size of a large coin. After the door closed, Mason examined the object. One side bore the impression of a plantation house, the other a distinctive monogram, B.C.H. "Beauregard Claude Hammond," Bee whispered, recognizing the initials. "That's his plantation token." Thunderhawk took the metal disc, turning it in the lamplight. "What does it mean?" "Plantation owners use these as currency with their workers, redeemable only at plantation stores," Bee explained. "This one belongs to Willow Creek," Hannah frowned. "Why would the innkeeper send this to us?" "A warning, perhaps," Mason suggested. "Or a message that we're being watched." Thunderhawk studied the token more closely. Around its edge, barely visible in the dim light, someone had etched a series of tiny marks, Apache symbols similar to those Bright Star had written in the ledger margins. "This is from her," he said, his heart quickening. "Bright Star sent this." Bee leaned forward, examining the marks. "How is that possible?" "We're still hundreds of miles from Willow Creek." Thunderhawk traced the tiny symbols with his fingertip. "She writes of eyes watching the roads, warnings about increased patrols." His finger stopped on a particular mark. "And this is a date." "The auction," Bee translated, understanding dawning in her eyes. "She's confirming when Hammond plans to sell Morning Light," Mason calculated quickly. "That's 12 days from now. We'd need to ride hard, change horses at every opportunity." "Then we ride hard," Thunderhawk said, closing his fist around the plantation token. "We've come too far to fail now." That night, as the others slept, Thunderhawk sat by the window, turning the metal disc in his fingers. The cold, tarnished token represented everything he despised: ownership of human beings, the system that had stolen his family. Yet Bright Star had transformed it, just as she had transformed the plantation ledger, into a vessel for communication, for resistance. Even separated by vast distance, they were finding ways to reach each other. In the morning, they would ride south with renewed urgency. But tonight, Thunderhawk allowed himself to feel something he had carefully guarded against during their journey. Hope. After 9 days of hard riding, changing horses at every opportunity, they crossed into Louisiana territory. The landscape transformed around them: dense cypress swamps, sprawling cotton fields, and oppressive humidity that clung to skin like a second layer. They had parted ways with the Porters 2 days earlier, the couple continuing to New Orleans to make contact with Jerome Baptiste, while Thunderhawk and Bee took a more direct route to Willow Creek Plantation. They made camp in a secluded bayou, carefully hidden from the main road. According to Bee's recollection, they were less than a day's ride from Hammond's property, We need to approach with caution, B warned, as they huddled beside a small, smokeless fire. Hammond employs armed overseers who patrol the boundaries. Dogs, too. Thunderhawk nodded, his expression grim. Tell me about the plantation layout. B picked up a stick and began drawing in the soft earth. The main house sits on a hill overlooking the fields. Hammond's pride, 3 stories with white columns, built to impress. Her makeshift map took shape as she continued. Slave quarters are here, behind the processing barns. Field workers in these long buildings. House servants in these smaller cabins closer to the main residence. Where would Bright Star and Morning Light be kept? The west wing of the main house, B replied, marking the location. Hammond keeps Bright Star separate from the others. She and Morning Light share a room on the 2nd floor, but it's locked from the outside at night. Thunderhawk studied the crude map, committing every detail to memory. Guards. 2 men patrol the grounds at night. Another stays in the entrance hall of the main house. B's voice dropped lower. Hammond's room is on the 2nd floor, opposite wing from Bright Star's. As they continued planning, a rustling sound from the underbrush put them instantly on alert. Thunderhawk reached for his knife, while B extinguished the fire with a handful of dirt. They remained motionless, listening. From the darkness emerged a figure, a young black boy no more than 12, barefoot and dressed in tattered clothes. He froze upon seeing them, poised to flee. "We won't hurt you," B said gently, keeping her voice low. "Are you running?" The boy nodded cautiously, his eyes darting between them. "You ain't patrollers?" "No," Thunderhawk assured him. "We journey to Willow Creek." At the plantation's name, the boy's expression changed from fear to disbelief. "You going to Hammond's place?" "Folks run from there, not to it. We search for family," Thunderhawk explained, careful not to reveal too much. The boy seemed to make a decision. He approached slowly, reaching into his ragged shirt. "Lady at the creek crossing gave me this. Said if I saw Indian man and colored woman traveling together, I should pass it on." In his outstretched palm lay a small object that caught the moonlight, a child's drawing on a scrap of linen, folded into a tight square. Thunderhawk took it carefully, unfolding the delicate fabric. The crude charcoal drawing showed 3 figures, a tall man with a feather, a woman with long braided hair, and between them a small child. Above them arched a crescent moon and stars. In the corner, almost invisible unless one knew to look, was a tiny symbol, Morning Light's mark, the same one Thunderhawk had seen on her corn-husk doll. "My daughter drew this," he whispered. His voice thick with emotion, B peered at the drawing. "She's never seen you, yet she drew you as a warrior." Bright Star's stories, Thunderhawk realized. "She made me real to our child through words." The boy shifted nervously. "I gotta keep moving. Patrollers check this area before dawn." B offered him some of their food. "Where are you heading?" "North," he answered simply. "Heard there's a place called Canada where they can't catch you." Thunderhawk reached into his pack and withdrew Fisher's map. "Follow this path," he said, tracing the route with his finger. "Look for houses with a candle in the north-facing window." As the boy disappeared into the night, Thunderhawk carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his medicine pouch. "We're close," he said. "Bright Star knows we're coming, which means Hammond might know too," B warned. "We need to move faster than planned." By first light, they had reached the outskirts of Hammond's vast property. From their vantage point on a low ridge, they could see Willow Creek plantation spread out before them, hundreds of acres of cotton fields, where enslaved workers already toiled in the morning heat. Beyond them stood processing barns, equipment sheds, and rows of crude cabins. And dominating it all was the main house, gleaming white in the morning sun, precisely as B had described. "There," she whispered, pointing to a second-floor window in the west wing. "That's where they're kept." Thunderhawk narrowed his eyes, studying the sprawling estate that held his family captive. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a figure at the window, a woman with long, dark hair, but she disappeared too quickly for him to be certain. "The auction is tomorrow," B reminded him. "Hammond will likely move Morning Light to New Orleans today." Thunderhawk's hand went to his medicine pouch, feeling the outline of his daughter's drawing through the leather. 10 years of waiting had come down to these final hours. We go in tonight, he decided. Under darkness. The house will be guarded, Bee cautioned. And Hammond hosts a dinner for potential buyers this evening. The place will be filled with guests. Thunderhawk turned to her, his expression reflecting the warrior he had once been and had become again. Then we use the gathering as cover. The more eyes focused on Hammond, the fewer watching for us. Bee nodded, understanding his determination. I know a way in through the kitchen gardens. The staff will be busy with the dinner service. As they retreated to prepare, Thunderhawk took a final look at the plantation. Somewhere in that grand house, his wife and daughter were waiting, perhaps watching, certainly hoping. After 10 years of separation, only a few hours remained. Wait for me, he whispered to the distant window. I'm coming. Darkness shrouded Willow Creek Plantation as Thunderhawk and Bee crouched at the edge of the kitchen gardens. Through the windows of the main house, they could see the glow of chandeliers and the silhouettes of Hammond's dinner guests, wealthy planters and merchants gathered to preview tomorrow's auction offerings. The service entrance is there, Bee whispered, pointing to a side door where house servants bustled in and out carrying trays. Kitchen staff will be focused on the dinner. We can slip in with the confusion, Thunderhawk nodded, adjusting the plain white servant's jacket they had obtained for this purpose. The disguise felt like a betrayal of his identity, but he understood its necessity. Beside him, Bee had transformed into her former role as a house servant, her demeanor subtly shifting to reflect years of practiced submission. Remember, she cautioned, eyes down, speak only if spoken to. Most whites see servants as furniture, present but invisible. They waited for a moment when several staff members entered together, then slipped through the door behind them. The kitchen was chaos, cooks shouting orders, servants arranging elaborate dishes, the clatter of fine china and silver. No one spared them a second glance as they moved purposefully through the noise and steam. Bee led them down a narrow corridor and up a servant's staircase to the second floor. Here the grandeur of the main house was on full display. Ornate wallpaper, polished wood floors. Expensive artwork depicting pastoral scenes that stood in stark contrast to the brutal reality of the plantation's operations. This way, Bee murmured, turning down a hallway that led to the west wing. They froze at the sound of approaching footsteps. A door opened ahead, and a stern-faced woman in housekeeper's attire emerged. She spotted them immediately. You there! What business do you have up here? She demanded. Bee stepped forward, eyes appropriately lowered. Fresh towels for Ms. Brightwater, ma'am. Mr. Hammond's orders for his special guests. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. I don't recognize you. Just arrived from the Fairchild plantation yesterday, ma'am. On loan for the auction preparations. The woman studied them for a long moment. Just when Thunderhawk thought their ruse had failed, she sniffed disapprovingly and handed Bee a key from her ring. 10 minutes, she warned. Then back downstairs where you belong. As soon as she disappeared around the corner, they hurried to the door she had indicated. Bee's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft click, and they slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The room was small but furnished with unexpected care. A proper bed rather than a pallet, a washstand with porcelain basin, even a small bookshelf with several volumes. Near the window stood a woman, her back to them, a long braid of black hair hanging down her simple blue dress. Who is it? She asked without turning, her voice quiet but clear. I told Hammond I would not come down tonight. Bright Star, Thunderhawk whispered, her true name falling from his lips like a prayer. She went completely still. For a heartbeat, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then slowly she turned. 10 years had changed her. The young woman of his memories had matured into a woman of strength and dignity. Fine lines marked the corners of her eyes and mouth. But those eyes, they were exactly as he remembered, dark and fierce and beautiful. Thunderhawk. Her voice broke on his name. Is it truly you? He stepped forward, and suddenly she was in his arms, solid and warm and real after a decade of dreams. He held her as if she might disappear, his face buried in her hair, breathing in her scent. I waited, he murmured against her temple. Every day. I knew you would, she whispered back. I told our daughter you were a man of your word. At the mention of their child, Thunderhawk drew back slightly. Morning Light, where is she? A shadow crossed Brightstar's face. Hammond took her to his study. The Wilkerson boy is here with his father. They're finalizing the sale for tomorrow. Bee moved to the door, listening for footsteps. We don't have much time before the housekeeper returns. From beneath the bed, Brightstar pulled a small wooden box, its lid intricately carved with figures of running horses. She opened it to reveal a collection of small items, a beaded bracelet, dried herbs tied with string, a carved stone, and a lock of black hair that matched the one Thunderhawk carried. I've kept our traditions as best I could, she said, removing the stone and pressing it into his palm. This was Morning Light's first carving. She made it for her father. Thunderhawk stared at the small stone in his hand. Though crude, the image was unmistakable. An eagle in flight, like the wooden one he had carved for Brightstar so long ago. She has your spirit, Brightstar continued, pride evident in her voice. She asks about you every day. Wants to know everything, how you hunt, how you ride, the songs you sing. Does she know we're coming? Thunderhawk asked. Brightstar nodded. I told her to be ready. To wait for my signal. Her expression hardened with determination. Hammond plans to move us both after the auction. It must be tonight. The house is full of guests, Bee warned, and guards at every exit. Then we use that, Brightstar said, revealing a strategic mind honed by years of survival. Hammond will showcase Morning Light at the end of dinner. It's his pattern with valuable property, creating competition among buyers. Her voice held controlled rage at the concept. When they return her to the study, that's our moment. The guests will be drinking, the guards distracted. From her pocket, she withdrew a small object that gleamed dully in the lamplight, an ornate silver key with the distinctive H monogram on its bow. This opens Hammond's private door to the gardens, she explained. He doesn't know I made an impression in soap and had a copy fashioned by a blacksmith in the quarters. Thunderhawk felt a surge of pride at her resourcefulness. You've planned for this? For years, she confirmed, waiting for the right moment. Her eyes held his. For you. A soft knock at the door made them all tense. Bee cracked it open cautiously, then relaxed. It's Daniel, she whispered. One of ours. A young house servant slipped into the room. They're bringing the girl up from the study, he reported urgently. Hammond's showing her off now, not after dinner. Brightstar's face paled. We're out of time. Thunderhawk's hand went to the knife hidden beneath his servant's jacket. Then we changed the plan. Now. Daniel led them through a narrow servant's passage that connected the wings of the grand house. Hammond's in the main dining room, he whispered. The girl's been taken to the adjoining parlor for viewing. How many men? Thunderhawk asked. 8 gentlemen plus Hammond. Their wives remain upstairs. Daniel's eyes darted nervously. 2 guards at the main entrance, one by the parlor door. They paused at a small wooden panel, a servant's viewing port disguised within the parlor's elaborate wainscoting. Through this hidden observation point, designed to allow house staff to anticipate Master's needs without being seen, Thunderhawk got his first glimpse of his daughter. Morning Light stood on a small platform in the center of the ornate room, illuminated by the glow of oil lamps. She was dressed in a fine blue dress that seemed to swallow her small frame. Her black hair arranged in an unnatural style meant to appeal to white sensibilities. Despite these trappings, her posture remained proudly erect, her expression carefully neutral, a mask that couldn't quite conceal the defiance in her eyes. Those eyes. Thunderhawk's heart clenched in his chest. They were his own, looking back at him across 10 years of separation. A heavy-set man in an expensive brocade waistcoat circled the platform, examining Morning Light as one might inspect a horse. Behind him stood a thin boy of perhaps 13, his pale face set in lines of entitlement and cruelty. "Remarkable specimen, Hammond," the man commented, his voice carrying through the panel. "Hardly looks Indian at all. Good pass for exotic Spanish or Italian blood." Hammond, a tall, silver-haired man with the florid complexion of a dedicated drinker, smiled indulgently. "Her mother is the true prize, Wilkerson. Educated, speaks 3 languages, runs my household accounts better than any white bookkeeper. Yet you're not selling the mother?" Wilkerson raised an eyebrow. "Some possessions become too valuable to part with," Hammond replied. "But the girl will make a fine companion for your son. Teach her proper ways early, and she'll be both decorative and useful." Thunderhawk's hand tightened on his knife, until Bright Star's fingers gently covered his. "Not yet," she whispered. "Wait for the right moment." The men continued their discussion of price and terms, while Morning Light stood silently, her gaze fixed on a point above their heads. Only once did her composure slip, when Hammond mentioned separating her from her mother. For just a moment, fear flickered across her young face before the careful mask returned. "She's strong," Thunderhawk murmured. "She's had to be," Bright Star replied. Daniel reappeared at the passage entrance. "They're concluding the viewing. Hammond will return her to the study while the gentlemen have brandy." Bright Star nodded. "That's our chance." The study connects to Hammond's private library, which has the garden door. As they prepared to move, Bright Star reached beneath her dress collar and withdrew a necklace, a simple leather cord from which hung a small buckskin pouch similar to Thunderhawk's medicine bag. She opened it carefully to reveal a pinch of reddish earth. "Soil from our homeland," she explained. "I took it the night they captured me. Saved it all these years." She dipped her finger in the earth and drew a single line across her forehead. "Tonight, we return to our true selves." Thunderhawk understood. This was not just an escape. It was a reclaiming of identity. He accepted the pouch, marking his own forehead with the sacred earth of their ancestors. They followed Daniel through the narrow passage toward Hammond's study. The sounds of the dinner party, crystal clinking, forced laughter, the murmur of satisfied, wealthy voices filtered through the walls. A different world, separated from theirs by mere inches of wood and plaster. "Here," Daniel whispered, stopping at another hidden panel. "Hammond will bring her through that door. Wait for my signal." He disappeared to resume his serving duties, leaving Thunderhawk, Bright Star, and Bee pressed against the wall of the cramped passage. Minutes passed in tense silence before they heard the study door open. "Wait here," came Hammond's voice. "I'll return after concluding our business." Touch nothing. The door closed, followed by the distinct click of a key turning in a lock. Through the viewing port, Thunderhawk could see Morning Light standing alone in the study, her small shoulders finally sagging now that no observers were present. She moved to the window, looking out at the night sky with such naked longing that it physically pained him to watch. The panels slid open beneath Bright Star's hand. "Morning Light," she called softly. The girl whirled, eyes widening as she saw her mother emerge from the wall. "Mama?" Her gaze shifted to Thunderhawk, confusion giving way to dawning recognition. "Is that your father?" Bright Star confirmed, her voice breaking slightly. "As I promised." Thunderhawk stepped into the room, kneeling to meet his daughter at eye level. 10 years of imagined conversations fled his mind, leaving only overwhelming emotion. "I've waited so long to meet you," he said simply. Morning Light approached cautiously, studying his face with intense concentration. She reached out hesitantly, her small fingers touching the earth mark on his forehead, then the identical one on her mother's. "You came for us," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "Just like in the stories. I promised your mother I would build us a home," Thunderhawk replied. "It has been waiting for you." Morning Light's solemn expression bloomed into a smile that transformed her entire face, revealing a dimple identical to Bright Star's. Without warning, she threw her arms around his neck in a fierce embrace. The door handle rattled suddenly. "What's this? Who locked the door?" Hammond's irritated voice came from the hallway. "Quickly," Bright Star urged, pulling them toward the library door. "We have minutes at most." As they hurried through the connecting library toward freedom, Morning Light broke away for a moment, running to a desk where an ornate silver letter opener lay. She grabbed it, her small face set with determination. "He'll follow us," she said with a child's simple certainty. "This is sharp enough to slow him down." In that moment, Thunderhawk saw himself in her completely, the warrior's instinct to protect, to fight when necessary. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "It's time to go home." The silver key turned smoothly in the garden door lock. Brightstar pushed it open to reveal a manicured path winding between ornamental hedges, dimly lit by the quarter moon overhead. Behind them, Hammond's angry shouts grew louder as he summoned guards to the study. "This way," Bee whispered, pointing toward a dense rose arbor that offered concealment along the garden's southern edge. "The slave quarters lie beyond that tree line. Daniel will have horses waiting." They moved swiftly through the shadows, Thunderhawk carrying Morning Light when her ornate shoes proved too cumbersome for running. The girl clung to his neck, her small body tense but trusting. As they reached the arbor, a shout came from behind them. A guard had spotted their movement and was raising the alarm. Lanterns began to appear around the main house, bobbing like predatory fireflies as Hammond's men spread out to search the grounds. "We'll never reach the tree line undetected," Brightstar said, her voice calm despite the danger. "We need a diversion," Bee nodded grimly. "I'll draw them off. Meet you at the creek crossing." Before they could protest, she darted out from the arbor and ran in the opposite direction, deliberately making enough noise to attract attention. Several guards immediately gave chase, their lanterns swinging toward her fleeing form. "Come," Thunderhawk urged. Her sacrifice must not be wasted. They slipped from the arbor's protection and raced toward the distant trees, using the diverted guard's absence to cross the exposed ground between garden and wilderness. They had almost reached the sheltering darkness when a figure stepped directly into their path. Hammond stood before them, a double-barreled shotgun leveled at Thunderhawk's chest. His face twisted with rage and disbelief in the moonlight. "Thief!" he spat, his refined plantation manners abandoned in fury. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize an Apache in my own house, no matter how you dressed him?" Thunderhawk slowly lowered Morning Light to the ground, positioning himself between Hammond and his family. "A man cannot steal what was never yours to own. Everything on this plantation belongs to me," Hammond snarled. "Including them." He gestured with the shotgun toward Brightstar and Morning Light. 10 years I've provided for them, educated them, kept them from the fields. This is how my generosity is repaid?" Brightstar stepped forward, her voice carrying the dignity of her true heritage. "You stole us from our land, our people, kept us in chains and called it generosity." Hammond's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Get back to the house, Brightwater. Take the girl. I'll deal with your punishments later." When neither moved, his voice rose. "Now!" "My name," she said with quiet power, "is Brightstar." Thunderhawk assessed their situation with a warrior's precision. Hammond stood 5 paces away, the shotgun unwavering. The guards who had chased Bee were returning, having either caught her or realized the deception. Behind Hammond, more men approached from the main house, carrying lanterns and weapons. They were surrounded, outgunned, with nowhere to run. Morning Light pressed against her father's side, her small hand slipping into his. The contact seemed to flow strength between them, an unspoken understanding passing from parent to child. She gave a barely perceptible nod and stepped slightly away. In that moment, from the shadows behind Hammond, a loop of leather whipped through the air and settled around the plantation owner's neck. The whip's handle jerked backward, pulling Hammond off balance. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ground as he staggered, clawing at the constriction around his throat. Bee stood behind him, her face set in grim determination as she maintained her grip on the whip, Hammond's own bullwhip, taken from a hook by the stables during her diversion. "Run!" she shouted to them. "I can't hold him long." Thunderhawk seized the moment, grabbing the shotgun from Hammond's loosening grip. He fired the remaining barrel into the air, causing the approaching guards to dive for cover. In the confusion, he gathered Morning Light in one arm and reached for Brightstar with the other. They sprinted for the tree line as Hammond collapsed to his knees, still fighting against the whip. Bee released her hold and raced after them, the 4 fugitives disappearing into the protective darkness of the cypress swamp just as the guards recovered and gave chase. Daniel waited for them as promised, holding the reins of 4 horses at the edge of a narrow creek. "This way," he urged, already mounting his own horse. "Follow the water to mask your trail." As Thunderhawk helped Morning Light onto a horse, sharing the saddle with her mother, Bee pressed the bullwhip into his hands. "Take it," she insisted. "A reminder of what we leave behind and what still lies ahead." The leather was fine-crafted, with an ivory handle bearing Hammond's monogrammed initials. An instrument of pain and control, now transformed into a symbol of their defiance. Thunderhawk accepted the whip, securing it to his saddle as they prepared to ride. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, men with dogs and lanterns entering the swamp behind them. "They'll follow our trail," Brightstar observed. Her arm tight around Morning Light. "Let them try," Thunderhawk replied. The warrior fully awakened within him now. "We ride for the porters at the trading post. From there, north." As they urged their horses into the shallow creek, Morning Light looked back one last time at the plantation that had been her only known home. The grand white house glowed with lamplight on its hill, beautiful and terrible. "Will they catch us?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Thunderhawk met his daughter's eyes, seeing his own determination reflected there. "No," he promised. "From this moment forward you run only toward freedom, never from chains." As if to seal this vow, the clouds parted overhead, revealing a sky full of stars, the same stars under which he and Brightstar had made their original promise so long ago. They rode into the night, 4 shadows becoming one with the darkness, leaving behind the world of masters and slaves for the uncertain freedom that lay ahead. For 3 days, they pushed northward through bayou country, keeping to waterways and swamps where the pursuing dogs would lose their scent. Daniel had parted from them at dawn after their escape, returning to the plantation to maintain his cover and help others who might follow their path to freedom. They traveled mostly at night, resting during daylight hours in concealed camps. Morning Light adapted to the journey with remarkable resilience, never complaining despite the hardships. During quiet moments, Thunderhawk found himself studying his daughter, cataloging the ways she resembled both himself and Brightstar, his eyes and stubborn chin, her mother's quick smile and graceful movements. On the 4th day, they reached the trading post where the porters had promised to wait. The small settlement consisted of a general store, a stable, and several crude cabins nestled against a cypress grove. Mason Porter spotted them approaching and rushed out to meet them, his weathered face breaking into a relieved smile. "We'd almost given up hope," he admitted as he ushered them into a back room of the store. Hannah was there, quickly embracing Bee before turning to Brightstar and Morning Light with tears in her eyes. "You made it," she whispered, kneeling to greet the child. "You're safe now." Morning Light regarded the white woman cautiously, still uncertain of strangers after her plantation upbringing. But when Hannah offered her a small cloth doll, the girl's reserve softened slightly. "We can't linger," Mason warned, as they gathered around a rough wooden table. "Hammond's men came through yesterday offering rewards. $500 for the return of his property." The words soured in his mouth. "The whole region will be watching for you," Hannah added, serving bowls of stew. "Especially the river crossings." Thunderhawk exchanged a glance with Brightstar. They had known the dangers when they began this journey, but hearing the price on their heads made the threat more tangible. "Jerome Baptiste arrived this morning," Mason continued. "He's agreed to take you as far as Memphis on his supply boat. You'll travel hidden among his cargo." As they discussed the arrangements, Morning Light slipped away to explore the storeroom. She returned moments later, clutching something in her small hands. "Father," she said, the word still new on her tongue. "What is this?" She held out a folded newspaper, yellowed with age but still legible. The masthead identified it as the Missouri Republican, dated 5 years earlier. Thunderhawk took it, uncertain why it had captured her attention, until he saw what was circled on the page, a notice listing runaway slaves and offering rewards for their capture. Among the descriptions was one that made his blood run cold. Apache woman calls herself Brightstar, traveling with female child. Distinctive blue beads sometimes worn in hair. Property of B.C. Hammond, Willow Creek Plantation, Louisiana. $300 reward. The newspaper was a stark reminder of how long Hammond had been hunting them, of how Bright Star's attempts to escape had never stopped despite the increasing danger. "He never gave up looking for us," Bright Star said softly, reading over his shoulder. "Every time we tried to run." Morning Light pressed against her father's side. "Is he still looking?" "Yes," Thunderhawk answered honestly. "But we're looking forward, not back." Hannah gently took the newspaper. "This is old news," she said, deliberately tearing it in half. "Your story has a different ending now." That evening, as they prepared to depart with Baptiste, Mason presented Thunderhawk with several items for their journey: supplies, ammunition for the Navy Colt, and a leather portfolio containing the forged Freedom Papers. "These should get you through Union territory," he explained. "But stay alert. Even in free states, the Fugitive Slave Act puts you at risk." As Thunderhawk secured the papers, he noticed something else in the portfolio: a folded parchment with an official seal. He opened it carefully, revealing a detailed map of the Western Territories, including the region where his ranch stood. "Land deed," Mason explained, "to your property, properly registered with the territorial authorities." Thunderhawk stared at the document in disbelief. In all his years building the ranch, he had never secured legal ownership in the white man's system. "How did you—" "Filed it myself before we left," Mason said. "Called in some favors. It's registered under the name Thomas Hawk, but it's yours by right." He clasped Thunderhawk's shoulder. "No one can take it from you now." The significance of this gift was not lost on Thunderhawk. Without legal ownership, he would have remained vulnerable, his family's sanctuary always at risk. The deed represented security they had never known. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for what this meant. As dusk fell, they boarded Baptiste's flat-bottomed riverboat. The French Creole trader had constructed a hidden compartment beneath the cargo deck, lined with blankets and stocked with provisions for the journey north. "It will be cramped," Baptiste warned in his melodious accent, "but safer than open travel." Before climbing into the compartment with Bright Star and Morning Light, Thunderhawk took a final moment with the porters. "We can never repay what you've done," he said. Hannah embraced him. Then Bright Star. "Live free," she replied. "That's payment enough." As Baptiste's boat slipped away from the dock under cover of darkness, Thunderhawk held his family close in their hidden refuge. Above them, cargo shifted and settled as the vessel found its rhythm on the water. Morning Light, nestled between her parents, looked up with solemn eyes. "Is it far to home?" "Yes," Thunderhawk answered. "But we're already there." He gestured to their circle, the three of them together at last. "This is home now, wherever we go." Bright Star's hand found his in the darkness, completing the circle. After 10 years of separation, after impossible journeys and narrow escapes, they were finally together, a family bound not by chains or property deeds, but by something far stronger. The boat moved steadily northward, carrying them toward a freedom that, like the stars overhead, had guided them through their darkest nights. The eastern horizon glowed golden pink as Thunderhawk stood at the edge of his property, just as he had done every morning for 10 years. But this dawn was different. This time he was not alone. "Is this where you waited for us?" Morning Light asked, her small hand tucked securely in his. "Every day," he answered, looking down at his daughter's upturned face. 6 weeks had passed since their escape from Willow Creek Plantation. 6 weeks of careful travel through dangerous territory, of hiding in safe houses, of learning each other's ways. They had encountered both kindness and hatred on their journey north, a slave patrol in Tennessee that had nearly discovered them, a Quaker family in Missouri that had hidden them in their cellar during a house search, a Cherokee trader who had guided them through mountain passes to avoid main routes. Throughout it all, Morning Light had shown a quiet courage that made Thunderhawk's heart swell with pride. Now, they stood together on the ranch that had been built for them, watching the sun rise over land that was legally theirs. "It's so big," Morning Light whispered, taking in the vast open space. No fences to keep us in. From the cabin behind them came Bright Star, carrying a pot of morning coffee. The weeks of freedom had transformed her, her movements more fluid, her smile quicker, the watchful tension in her shoulders gradually easing. "The water in the creek is sweet," she told Morning Light. "Later we'll gather berries from the bushes near the north pasture." As the sun cleared the horizon, a movement caught Thunderhawk's attention, a rider approaching from the direction of the settlement. He recognized Mason Porter's tall figure long before the man reached their fence line. "Visitors," Thunderhawk said, neither worried nor surprised. The Porters had arrived 2 days earlier, helping to prepare the long empty cabin for its new inhabitants. Mason dismounted, tipping his hat to Bright Star. "Hannah sent fresh bread," he said, offering a cloth-wrapped package. "And news." They gathered around the outdoor table Thunderhawk had built years ago, finally serving its intended purpose. As Bright Star poured coffee, Mason spread a newspaper on the weathered wood. "Came in on yesterday's mail coach," he explained, pointing to an article. "Thought you should see it." The headline read, "Louisiana planter found dead after pursuit of escaped slaves." Thunderhawk read the account silently, his expression betraying nothing. According to the paper, Beauregard Hammond had been found drowned in a bayou 3 weeks after setting out with a posse to recapture valuable property. The article noted that Hammond had become obsessed with the pursuit, neglecting his plantation affairs to the point of financial ruin. "It's over," Mason said quietly. "No one will come looking now. The plantation's being sold to cover Hammond's debts." Bright Star's hand found Thunderhawk's beneath the table, their fingers intertwining. Neither spoke. No words could encompass the complex emotions stirred by the news. Relief mingled with the shadow of a decade's suffering. Freedom tinged with memories of captivity. Morning Light, too young to fully understand, had wandered to the edge of the property where a half-finished fence marked the eastern boundary. She was examining one of the cedar posts with curiosity. "What are these marks?" she called, running her fingers over the notches carved into the wood. Thunderhawk joined his daughter, kneeling beside her. "Each line marks a month I waited," he explained. 120 notches. 10 years. The child's fingers traced the patient record of her father's devotion. "There are no new ones," she observed. "No need," he replied simply. "The waiting is over." As Morning Light ran off to explore her new home, Bee emerged from the cabin, where she had been setting up her own quarters in what had once been the storage room. Since their escape, she had become more than a fellow fugitive. She was family now, bound to them by shared danger and sacrifice. "Porter says the closest patrol is 3 days' ride from here," she reported. "And the neighbors?" "Curious but not unfriendly," Thunderhawk assured her. "Sharp Knife's band trades with them. They'll accept us." Bee nodded, some of the wariness leaving her eyes. She had carried Bright Star's burden for so long that adjusting to safety was perhaps harder for her than for any of them. From her apron pocket, she produced something small and bright, a carved wooden stake no longer than a finger, painted with colorful symbols. "Morning Light made this," she said, offering it to Thunderhawk. "Asked me to help her with the colors. Said it's for the new fence post." The small stake was decorated with 4 distinct symbols, a hawk in flight, a star, the morning sun, and a 4th mark that Thunderhawk recognized as the Apache symbol for freedom. "She wants you to add it to the boundary," Bee explained. "Said it's time to mark a new beginning." Thunderhawk turned the painted stake in his hands, feeling its weight, lighter than the cedar posts that had marked his years of waiting, yet somehow more substantial. That afternoon, as the sun began its westward journey, the family gathered at the eastern boundary. Together, Thunderhawk and Morning Light set a new cedar post into the ground beside the old weathered one. Instead of notches marking time spent alone, this post held Morning Light's painted stake, secured in a specially carved niche. "What does it mean?" Mason asked, observing the ceremony from a respectful distance. "Family," Bright Star answered, her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Home freedom," as twilight settled over the land. Thunderhawk stood once more at his eastern boundary, not alone in vigil as before, but surrounded by the family he had waited for, the family that had fought its way back to him across impossible odds. Behind them, smoke rose from their cabin chimney. Before them stretched the wide, open country, no longer a reminder of solitude, but a promise of possibility. The waiting had ended. Their story together had just begun.